All right, I think we're live. Sterling, welcome to the Nik Fuller Show. Pumped to have you.
Absolutely, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Before we jump into things, we have to tell people to do what? They have to
You have
subscribe.
to click subscribe and hit that like button. It only helps the YouTube algorithm.
There you go. Love it. You know the script. Perfect. Well, I think that's good enough. Sterling, for people who don't know you, what do you do? Who are you? And from there, we'll jump into things.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, in summary, I'm an accomplished sales leader, over 10 years of experience in leading, building, and involving successful global programs. And primarily that's been around BDR, SDR, inside sales teams, if you just want to use some of those acronyms and generalities.
Yeah, love it. So deep experience building sales teams. I think on today's podcast, you're going to explain what a BDR is, difference between that and maybe an account executive. We're going to get into how do you build a BDR function, what's the right structure, where have you seen different pitfalls and recommendations, and then I think we wrap up with how do people break into kind of a role that you're in here today. So. I think that's going to be the general outline. We'll see where the conversation takes us, though.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Sounds great.
so before we get into all that kind of expertise, I'd love to walk through kind of your career background on where you started, because you spent time at CBon, Microsoft, OneTrust, a lot of big names. So how did you start out, and can you walk me through that career progression?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great starting point. It goes all the way back really to college. I actually started a business with a friend of mine, and it was really around doing door to door sales. And then got into just technology. I've always been a tech person. So going out of college, it was a decision between pharmaceutical sales or get into tech. And so just with me, it was like, hey, I want to go work for a publicly traded tech company, which was CBeyond. I really enjoyed CBeyond experience. It was a definitely different from what sales teams are today, but gave a good backbone and really actually kickstarted where I'm at today, which is really around training. For me, it was, and people aren't familiar with this anymore, but it was true cold calling, which is knocking on 50 doors a day, suit and tie, and 90-degree humid Georgia weather. So no GPSs. You had a physical map. Your CRM was getting business cards and writing on the back of them, putting them in a shoebox and taking them back to the office, and then dial for dollars. So a lot has changed, but CBeyond's model was really great in the sales training that they really provided. And then they really had a great system where it was career progression, really building that farm league of you come in, if you're a successful sales rep, you become a team lead, which is a player coach type role. And then if you're good at that, then you become a sales manager. So I went through that progression. And when I became a sales manager, I opened up our Washington, D.C. branch. So that was my first experience in getting promoted into a management role, but also building a new office, which was very interesting when you're looking at all the different functionalities of a business and the needs and really the culture piece in trying to develop it in a whole new market. So I was in that space for over 3 years. And then I was doing T1s and it was telecom. So, fiber and technology changes. So I kind of followed that direction. And a few years later, I landed at AirWatch, which was a great startup company. I think I was like employee 300. Got back into sales as an AE. And after 6 months of being a successful account executive, I was approached because pretty much everybody in Atlanta knew who CBon was. And if you lasted more than 6 months there, it was like, how did you do it? Like, what's going on? We want you. So that was always a feather in your hat. So I was approached to be a manager to lead a whole new kind of experiment of building a inside sales team, which at that point was kind of like a BDR function, but also building a necessity of, in a startup, a lot of times in this scenario, you have a sales team and they're taking all the leads, and the smaller deals tend to take up more time than the larger deals you're trying to land. So how do you take off all that noise and really build what I thought was efficient in building a transactional sales model, while also being able to bring in new hires, teach them what I ended up calling the 3 Ps of people, process, and product, and get them up to speed. And then after being in my program for 6 months to a year, you can move into an account executive role. So really taking that model of progression, and I call it like a farm league system. It's a great benefit for the company because these people, they're hungry, they want to move up the food chain in a sales career or into other roles in the company. And it's definitely easier for the company, instead of taking flyers on, people brand new to the industry, to come in and sell immediately. You already have people that have been doing it for quite some time. So really enjoyed that. Saw all the startup, experience from the executive levels and working with leadership. And so really overall great experience that led to AirWatch being acquired by VMware. So at that time, I was approached by Microsoft to actually build a program for them, which focused around Azure. I was at a crossroads of go to one 800-pound gorilla through an acquisition, or actually, make the jump to another company. So I actually talked to the CEO at the time and my, senior director, and they said, Microsoft sounds like a great shot, looks awesome. So it ended up being a great move. I was at Microsoft for over 8 years. I started, and the big focus with Microsoft was, how do we build an inside sales BDR type organization that can really support and grow the Azure business, where Microsoft was actually struggling for some time, and AWS was passing it. And the new CEO, who actually started a few months before me, came from Azure and built it. And so that was the big bet. It's like, we need to get Azure going. So across all the A13, what they call it, Microsoft, all the different regions in the world, and 800-pound gorillas, they all have budget. So the key thing, it's kind of like politics. We want the money. So whoever can build the program that gets adopted, it's, great for their career progression, but also it commands a lot more budget year over year. So I went into Microsoft working with a supplier, which typically in big companies, they outsource a lot of their work. And then if it's proven to be what we want to adopt, it turns into a full-time employee model. So over 5 years, I built out a BDR inside sales organization. I opened up an office in London, Singapore, and a satellite office in Bellevue, and scaled it it was over 120 people and covered 17 languages. So that was a fantastic experience. It ended up being chosen after 5 years as the gold standard in the model for Microsoft with Azure. And so we converted it to a full-time employee model that's now primarily based in Fargo, North Dakota for the US, and then the other subsidiaries absolved the representatives there and scaled out of their areas with the same model. So great experience. And after that, I was reassigned to another program with Microsoft in Dallas, Texas, to open up a new office doing a very similar function around Azure with a different organization. And I ended up having my first child, which was and only child, which was a great experience, but led me to move back to Atlanta. And so I was with the Microsoft reassignment process, but lo and behold, OneTrust approached me, and the founders of AirWatch essentially built OneTrust. So it was just a lot of the same names, faces, just we're a little older and grayer. And it was a really great move to really jump into another really great white space startup in the third party and privacy space. So been a great experience in learning that whole new ecosystem and building a BDR function that they were looking to scale out to support their growth. So I know that was probably a lot, but I think that kind of sums up a lot of what I've done over the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years takes a long time. So, uh, just hugely rich kind of value that you've gained over your career so far. So, really going from, I mean, just crazy that you're going door to door selling telecom to building out global BDR functions at companies like Microsoft. Just hugely impressive there, Sterling. So, when we look at there's got to be some fun stories from like building a BDR team and function. Do any like stand out, or should we wait till the end to find those out?
I mean, I think the fun stories is I call this type of organization that I've helped build many times in different companies, whether it's an 800-pound gorilla or a startup. It's controlled chaos, mainly because these organizations sit in between marketing and sales, and they either report to marketing or they report to sales. And so there's so many different flavors of teams like this too, and so many different directions, and they can change in an instant. So it's always moving. Targets always change, and ultimately, with my whole philosophy of building that farm league system, you're always bringing in new faces, new personalities, being hands on and coaching them. And I think one of the best parts and things I enjoy is seeing people's careers take off. I, for example, had someone that was an intern with me. 10 years later, they're, a director of sales at another company. So it's really fantastic to see, hey, I remember when you were first on my team and you really learned what sales is all about, what BDRs do, and, how to focus on the 3Ps and different sales methodologies that I, passed down through my experience. And, that's one of the biggest satisfactions in roles like this.
Love that. So, Sterling, what's a BDR? Let's start from the basics. What's the day to day look like? Who's typically in these roles? What are they measured on? How are they comped? Like, give me just like the basics here.
Like I said, there are so many different flavors and acronyms that they throw out there, so it can be sometimes complicated. And depending on the direction of the company, it's set up so many different ways. So BDR is the acronym is for Business Development Representative. Some companies use Sales Development Representative. Some companies use Inside Opportunity Managers. There's a whole host of different acronyms or terms, but those are probably the general ones. And ideally, the DNA of these representatives are typically no experience right out of college, or maybe a few years of experience in some sort of sales or some sort of professional career that they got started in, and they want to get into sales. And so it's pretty much the gateway into a sales organization. Typical days, again, vary on the flavor, but if you really summarize it, it's really following the processes of the company that are put in place. And what I work on is, really the processes, the structure, and their key thing that they're doing is making phone calls, sending out emails, and really trying to drive quality conversations that ultimately can turn into pipeline and close revenue for the sales organization. And so with that, if it's more sales and reports up into sales, it's making those calls, and sometimes they have key accounts they're really focused on. And if it's more leaning towards the marketing side, it's really focused around the marketing demand gen that they're creating. They're spending tons of money on this content. These leads are coming in. Who's going to fill these leads and call them and try to, generate revenue from all that marketing spend and brand awareness that they're trying to create. So ideally, that's what they're doing. So it could be either or a mixture of the two. I think that would kind of summarize it ideally, but the ultimate goal is, come in, gateway into sales or another part of the organization, possibly like, channel or sales operations, sales enablement, have that feeder system, and then you have the opportunity to grow. And these roles are really focused on learning how to, follow processes, learn the different skills to be able to have conversations with individuals, and learn how to use lots of tools that they probably haven't used before as well. So you're really building a good ground of being able to, leverage tools and ultimately be a productive professional in a career that they might not have thought that they were going into, or they're really wanting to get into it, and they want to hit the ground floor and learn.
So Sterling, you mentioned some orgs roll into sales and some into marketing. Why the difference? Is there, benefit to one or the other? How do you see that?
The great question. It really depends on the company. Some companies already have these programs already established. So it's kind of like, hey, this organization reports into sales because they have a motion that they're focused on. So that's one way to look at it from a sales end, where it's, an outbound motion. Hey, we have these sales reps. They're trying to, penetrate Fortune 1000 accounts, and we need them to be supported by BDRs, which is, calling, prospecting, looking up people in the organizations, leveraging the tools that they have, like different software tools like Outreach and Zoom Info. And there's so many tech stacks that companies leverage, and really trying to again, like, generate an opportunity, create a meeting for that AE to get looped into. So that's really the focus kind of from a sales perspective. And sometimes these roles just say, hey, the CRO owns this program. So typically the CRO is over the sales organization. Marketing, on the other side, it reports in the marketing from we're creating so many leads from our efforts through campaigns, webinars, you name it, any marketing activity. All these leads are coming in. We need somebody to handle it. And if sales is strictly focused on trying to sell, they don't have time to be responding to all these leads coming in, and then also, doing their prospecting and working deals and trying to actually close revenue for the company. So that's why sometimes they, report up into the CMO or that type of organization to really facilitate how do we turn these leads into pipeline for sales. So that's just kind of the different directions that some companies choose. Whether one's better than the other, it's a personal preference. I've seen both work, and I've seen both could go one way or the other that might be better for those companies. So it's always something to consider where you're at and where you want to be.
And is that where the terms like inbound versus outbound come in? So inbound marketing's generating these leads potentially, and we need someone to respond to them. And then outbound is, hey, we want to break into these accounts. I need someone finding contacts in those companies, getting them on the phone and trying to set meetings.
It could be. It's not necessarily straightforward like that. Inbound can and many times sit with sales and vice versa. So, but that is a good way to look at it. Inbound, you would think, yeah, leads are coming in. We need to respond to this activity, but it could still report up into sales, and then vice versa. You could be in the sales org and be doing inbound. But I would say outbound, outbound, when you do hear outbound, that does typically roll up into more of the sales organization, because there's more of the sales leadership alignment. Positions like mine are very aligned with the sales leaders in around how are we working together and having that collaboration and being able to drive revenue and penetrate these accounts that they're trying to ultimately land.
Yeah. And what typically makes like a successful BDR? What are those like characteristics, traits? What do you look for when you're hiring?
Hiring and onboarding is one of my favorite things in this role, and that's one of the key pillars of success in organizations like this. Working very close with the recruiting team and really building a strong, robust onboarding program are key fundamentals. With a BDR organization, my focus is you really want to build a business to be able to enable and help individuals you hire be successful. You don't want to set them up for failure. You want to enable them to be successful, to move through the organization and ultimately contribute and create more value. What I'm looking for when I'm working with recruiters is, I guess I summarize it as will versus skill. I will hire 9 times out of 10 someone that has more will than skill, because I can teach the skill. You do talk to individuals that just have that natural, talk. They feel like they can, sell ice to an Eskimo, as they say,
Mm-hmm.
on that cliche. But a lot of times you really just want to find people that are really hungry. They come in prepared in their interview. They might not have any experience, but they are really just super excited about the opportunity. They've demonstrated things in their, previous, where they're at, a lot of times like athletes, like, well, that shows a lot of dedication where, you were getting up and you were very, active and balancing a lot of different activities while you're in school. So those are kind of profiles. Sometimes, and for me personally, like, I've gone outside the box where sometimes we're like, hey, we need people with a college education. I've worked with recruiting and HR where it's like, no, we don't. Like, I know people that have been in the service industry where they were waiting tables or bartenders for a couple of years, hustling, working really, long hours, really after it. And it's like, hey, I want to get into sales. And those individuals, I can tell you time and time again, are extremely successful too. So really the DNA and the profile you're looking for, I'm looking for people that have the aptitude and the will and are going to be manageable and coachable. And that's a key recipe for success. Sometimes you will look at people saying, oh, they've been a BDR at another other company for a year or two. Great. They get the BDR experience. That could be good, but also at the same time, they could have developed a lot of bad habits. And those a lot of times can be more challenging to correct versus individuals that come in and actively want to learn.
Yeah, love that. I two takeaways there. I love hiring athletes, like college athletes, especially what I found is distance runners. Those guys have like the toughest mindset. They'll push through anything. I've worked with a few, and I'm just like, oh, you're the best. I want to clone you. Give me 5 of you, right? Uh,
It's one of those things where I feel like, with athletes, they've dealt with failure and pressure many times in their life. And when you get into the professional world, especially in the sales arena, you're going to face rejection. You're really going to have to roll up your sleeves. You really have to persevere through hard times, and celebrate the good times and the wins that you have. So they already kind of have that makeup there. It's just, I enjoy taking those attributes and molding them into a successful BDR that can really turn into a ultimate sales professional.
Definitely. And I love the non-traditional candidates that you talk about, especially from a sales kind of role. It's very relationship driven. You need to be organized and you need to like drive, but you need to be able to build relationships quickly. So someone like who's serving tables, they immediately are building those relationships right when they walk up.
Absolutely. And then the overarching theme when you're doing that too is understand your company's culture. Like, what are you trying to bring in? Who are the individuals? What type of traits do they, bring that really, shine what your brand is as a company? So that's something where you're looking at that piece, and then holistically, and then start filling in that talent.
Yeah, awesome. And so, Sterling, you've built a number of BDR programs. What are kind of like those key pillars you look at if you're standing up maybe a program for the first time? Where are you going to start out? Where do most companies need to focus? And what are the stumbling blocks they need to look out for if they're starting to build out a BDR program?
Yeah, great question. You know, Standing up a BDR team from the beginning is always great because you really can just build it the way you want to. But many times you're coming in and taking what's existing and instead of I kind of use the ship analogy, instead of coming in and turning it, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, you're just going to flip the ship over. So it's steady course correction, which can be, it can take a year to get there or so. But key pillars that I look at is we covered one, which is hiring and onboarding. Some of my previous experience, there was no onboarding. I use AirWatch for an example. It was 2 days of HR. Here's your laptop. Go figure it out. And a lot of sales jobs are like that too. Hey, you're now a sales rep. Here's your laptop. Go figure it out.
Here's your quota. Good luck.
Here's your quota. Good luck. With BDRs, you really want to, again, you want to enable them. They're brand new to this, so you really want to provide a good onboarding experience, and you want to build one that's also being able to ramp them up successfully, but also try to figure out and set goals on how to really bring in, how long does the hiring process take and how long does the onboarding process take? Because, you don't want someone onboarding for 3 months. We want to figure out can we get someone up and going on the phones as quick as possible. So let's say, 3-4 weeks is a benchmark. How do you get there? So hiring onboarding is the first pillar to figure out. The second piece, as a manager across the board is, driving team performance. That's a key thing. You have a team. How do you drive these individuals? Operational excellence is probably one of the biggest pillars. And then for me, also alignment with sales leaders. And that doesn't even have to be sales leaders. It could be, if you're in marketing, also with, marketing PMMs, product marketing managers, things of that nature that you're working closely with. But really, the other pillar that kind of leads into that is just the cross-functional alignment. These organizations are always, while they might report one or the other, they're sitting in between. And what I find all the time, which is the pitfall, is, marketing speaking French and sales is speaking German, and BDRs essentially are the translators. So there's so much going on in between those activities that you're really bridging the gap that, ultimately is that sales funnel. Everybody has a sales hat on, I think, in companies. So all the way from marketing to a deal closing, everybody, contributed to that. And that bridge to get there is the BDR organizations. So I would say those are the, key pillars in building a program to be successful.
Awesome. And I think a lot of times, BDR programs, they are that farm league, like you mentioned, but they're also, during that process, some of them are connected to AEs and they work with different account executives. Can you talk about what that's typically structured like? What's that relationship between a BDR and an AE? And I imagine there's some challenges there as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's always an interesting challenge that happens, mainly because, sales professionals, they all have their different personalities. Typically, the setup is you have, one BDR to, let's say, 3 AEs. And so each one's different. And some AEs want to be very hands-on and utilize their BDR. And then there's other personalities where it's like, I know my accounts, don't touch them. Don't, because you're just going to screw it all up. So the key thing is, what I think is very important in all that type of alignment with sales leadership is building what I call what are rows, like rules of engagement. Like how are you supposed to engage with your BDR? How is your BDR supposed to engage with your AE? And it can be as simple as, who sends the meeting invite? If there's a no-show, who's on first and trying to get the reschedule? I mean, when you're looking at processes, that's a key thing with BDRs and roles like this, and working with sales and marketing, is there, you always want to look at processes and see where there are gaps to be filled. So what I've seen with AEs is who's on first for different things. What is there a mentor type program? Are you learning from your AEs? Do you have a strategy? Typically what I've seen is, hey, they meet every 2 weeks. Here are these accounts. Can you try to call them and go after them. And that's not necessarily an effective way to use your BDR. We really want to even coach, these sales professionals, because they might want to be managers one day. So how do you effectively enable these sales professionals as AEs to work with these BDRs to be strategic in their business? So what are the cadences look like? What emails are we using? Let's look at the cadence, like what I build. Some people call it cadences or sequences of, what does email one look like? What day did it go out? When should we send the second one? We want to revise those things. Someone as me as a leader, I want to get that feedback, and I'm looking at analytics across all the BDRs of what's working, what's not working. So getting that data to figure those things out. But the AEs are super important in that process. And then from a BDR perspective, where are we constantly learning? You are going to, fail sometimes. I mean, it's in sales, and like I always use, again, a baseball analogy, highest paid players hit the ball 3 out of 10 times. So you're always going to have room to improve. And so we do need to learn from, our failures. Like, I had this guy on the phone and he ended up hanging up on me. Okay. All right. Well, let's figure out where we can circle back on that and try to learn from what went wrong. There's tools that can help with that, but also, again, working with the AEs and being transparent in those type of conversations is really important. Working, again, having those clear swim lanes on, reschedules, who's doing the messaging, simple things of that nature. And one of the pitfalls I see sometimes too is AEs, they sometimes treat their BDRs, SDRs like secretaries. And so next thing you know, someone like me, I'm reaching out to a BDR and it's like, what are you doing? I notice your metrics are a little down. And it's like, oh, I'm working on this, this, and this, and this for the AE. And it's like, whoa, it's not your swim lane. Bring that to me. Let me take that off your table. I can assist with that. And then I can work with sales leadership and the account executives on, how do we solve this and have the BDRs focused on what they clearly need to be doing day in and day out, and not do a lot of this busy work that it's not part of their job description. So I would say that's a pitfall that I find some people fall into. But again, it's just all about collaboration and really building a culture of working together. Whether it's not really your personality or not, you can learn how to really maximize BDRs to maximize your efforts as an account executive.
Sterling, you brought up two good points on kind of what someone in your role does, someone who leads a BDR function around, helping BDRs stay within their swim lane and not, getting sucked into other work that kind of gets put on their plate, as well as, coaching those BDRs. What else? And while also looking at the analytics and saying, all right, what's working? Hey, we're using this cadence, this sequence. How do we adjust that? What else kind of encompasses, ahead of a BDR function? What other kind of areas are you looking after?
Yeah, absolutely. Around, driving team performance, that's, hands-on training and coaching always. I never want to be a frontline manager. Any frontline manager that I've seen typically have their pitfalls. So it's not one of those like, hey guys, here's, some PowerPoints, look at them. Here are the cadences, go deliver. Again, these are they're your babies. They're brand new. They haven't been experienced in this role typically. So you got to be hands-on, train them, coach them, mentor them. You want to see them succeed to get to that next level, understand their goals, and you want to help, put together plans of them to achieve them. So that's a big thing there. One thing that's really, really important is building, really detailed instructions and playbooks. So if something's not documented, it needs to be documented. If there's a direction to do something, it needs to be documented and put into a playbook or some type of process handbook. You always want to have something that can replicate. You can't always rely on tribal knowledge. That works great in the beginning, but over time, you want to really build a machine. I love tribal knowledge. It's like, hey, you promoted some people, new people come in, they're learning from their peers that are more seasoned BDRs. You want to have that. You want to have that culture, but over time, you want to take all that really great knowledge from a tribal aspect and really start, building it into those playbooks and build that true machine that you want to execute on. You work on really providing clear goals and objectives, and that's not just how many phone calls did you make and how many meetings did you set. That's I would say I would think any person in this position, 10 times out of 10, if you had a one-on-one, what are your goals? They're going to all say pretty much the same thing. I'm going to hit my KPIs and I'm going to set X amount of meetings. And it's the same thing. But really, one of the things I like to use is like the STAR method of, what is a true goal that we're going to focus on over the next 2 weeks, and have them create it and then look at if they're able to, follow through with their goals and objectives that they have. I think that's just a great way to for them to professionally grow, but also it really shows the aptitude for them to be successful in the future as well. You're constantly, keeping a professional environment, which is standard. You want to really, what I call, teach people how to they're a business within a business, and they're a brand of the company, which is something that might be new for them. What we talked about earlier is be very involved in decision making. A lot of times people don't know what they don't know. And when they're being told by, let's say, an AE, for example, they think, oh, I got to do that because someone high up told me to do this. No, come to your manager. Let me, mitigate and really quarterback these things and take them off your plate. You constantly want to listen to suggestions. They're on the ground floor. They're talking to people constantly. So you want to get their feedback. You constantly want to celebrate wins. And then the biggest thing probably of all is communicate, communicate, communicate. If I have a brand new BDR or even a BDR that's been there for some time, if they're not asking questions, to me, that's just something's going off in my head of they don't know everything. They're hesitant. Something's going on. So I have an open door policy. That's a great culture to have. And everybody needs to communicate with each other and definitely with their manager to continue to grow. Some people have that fear of, oh, if I ask this, I'm going to feel, not intelligent or I can't do my job. That's totally incorrect. We always want to get better. And the only way you can do that is communicate. So that's a key thing that I look at there. From an operational standpoint, you really want to drive, what is the cadence of our team? Is it weekly stand-up meetings? Is it daily stand-up meetings? What do you do in those meetings to make them engaging? You really want to have those quality one-on-ones that I mentioned that go beyond the numbers. You want to really, one of the things that I see as a pitfall is so many companies spend a ton of money on tools. And one of the things, being a techie, I like to evaluate tools personally as well, because a lot of times, hey, we want to spend a ton of money on this software, and I take a look at it and I'm like, we're really only using 2 things out of this. Why spend all this money on this one software when we can probably go a different direction and save the company money and still be just as effective? That's one way to look at it. But when you have these tools and you've invested in them, are you using them effectively and correctly? That's probably one of the biggest things I see happens. They buy a new product. They think it's going to just be a game changer. They only use it to a certain capacity, and they're not even using that effectively. So again, building processes, training, playbooks on how to use these tools effectively and correctly to maximize what, ultimately why you bought it and why the salesperson convinced the company to invest into it. So that's huge. I would say that's probably a pretty big gap that companies do face when they go down that road in trying to put those systems in place. And that's why a lot of times CROs and executives are fearful of doing making big purchases like that. It's like, okay, if I do this, is it gonna be egg on my face? Or if I don't do anything, is it going to turn into a situation where I didn't address this? And so again, egg on my face. So which path do you go down? Typically indecision is the winner of the two
Yeah.
scenarios. That's probably going into a sales methodology. I think I just read Jolt, so that's kind of where I kind of went off on a tangent there, thinking of indecision and things of that nature. But most important, one of the most important areas is as a manager or a director in this role, you're really constantly standardizing structured procedures, and just again, always have positive emphasis in, you driving those procedures. Why are we doing this? Be transparent. This is why it's going to make things, better. This is how it's going to make you more successful. And so really, I would say that summarizes, a lot of what the role is, culture, coaching, mentoring, creating a way to have great knowledge sharing, developing, time management practices, embracing the failures and difficulties that are taking place, listen intently as a manager and to suggestions. And then, one big thing is identifying, repetitive tasks. Like, why are we doing something so many times and it's taking away time in our day to be productive and trying to, again, generate opportunities for the sales team. So that's one thing as a manager or, director role that you're looking at, is always looking at ways to, drive more efficiency. So taking away those, repetitive tasks and figuring out a way to do that. And then change management, is there a project or something and some initiative that we need to embark on? Are we collaborating and having that cross team functional alignment? Is it effective, and how do we measure against it to make sure that, we did this effectively? And if we had some missteps in this, what did we learn from that? So next time we have another project across teams, we can do it more effectively. So that's something that I feel like, this role and roles at different positions and companies I've been at, it's been extremely important. So
Sterling, with
a lot there. So
yeah, I love it, man. One thing that I think a lot of organizations have struggled with is, with COVID, everyone went remote, and especially for a function like a BDR team and sales in general, historically just like kind of thrived in kind of a war room environment. Everyone's sitting next to each other, a lot of chatter, a lot of opportunity to listen to each other and kind of feed off of that and learn. How are you seeing organizations kind of adapt, and especially when you bring in new folks who've not been in a sales role, maybe even in the professional world, into a BDR function, and now they're working from home? How do you get them up to speed? How do you like kind of bridge some of those gaps?
Oh, great question. I think that's the big thing that companies are trying to figure out these days. And I see companies going two different directions. Some are going, we're a remote company. Others are inching towards, we're doing hybrid, and we really we want everybody back in the office.
Mm-hmm.
The reasons why, well, there's a whole host of them, out there, but that's a totally different topic for another day. And probably with a different audience member around cybersecurity and, different things of that nature. But with, and in my experience, I've actually done both. I've probably managed 50% of the teams in my experience from a remote capacity, and the other 50% in office. They both have their pros and cons. The pros of being in the office is you're with each other, you're listening to each other, you have that camaraderie, you really have that culture that is strong, and it's really helpful for those new hires to pick up on things and ask questions in real time. But also, if you create the environment through things, a lot of companies use things like Teams and Slack. You're able to do that virtually as well, and that can also help with time management. It's like, hey, I have a question, and I can get to it when I have time, because when you're in the office, sometimes you might get caught up in just talking too much. And you don't want to be that manager that's like, hey, like, get back on the phones. My first job out of college was like that. It's like, hey, like, you're talking too much. Like, you need to like grind through it,
Yeah.
make your $50 in the next, 90 minutes. So, and then also what a lot of companies started embracing that COVID was a big knock on is the idea of the great open floor plans. I think you've seen them, and a lot of people have seen them. Definitely didn't help with the COVID experience, and also the noise can be quite challenging too. Some people need quiet spaces to be effective in their role. So again, pros and cons. I think really good for onboarding and learning as you mature and really know what I summarize as like the 3 Ps of people, process, and product. You can be effective in managing remotely. To keep people engaged remotely, again, the team stand-ups have, I've done things where, weekly happy hours, trivia nights. If people are wanting to actually come to a physical team event, if the team is located near each other, do things that have people engaged and talk. Again, communicating is really key. So if you have that open floor, I want to listen. I want my team to talk to me and ask me questions versus me coming out there and preaching. This is what we got to do. Go do it. Sign off and go do your day. It's every day is what questions do we have? What wins can we celebrate? What are we learning? And so that's again a big culture piece. And so that's a real key area that you have to focus on if you're doing a remote team setting. But that's, I would say, remote work is probably going to become more norm because there are tools out there that you can leverage that are really helpful. It's great to listen to people talk to each other and overhear phone calls, but there's some tools out there where there's call recording databases and you literally can look at, hey, I see these phone calls that actually were really good. You can listen to them and hear what the pitch was. And so you're getting more quality in the good calls, and then you can learn from the bad ones. And as a manager, you can, play some and, start, Q&A, like what was good about this, what was not so good about this. So I think leveraging a lot of the software now that's out there is really enabling remote work to be really beneficial. And I think a lot of people, especially with this new generation, people want to work remote. So I do think that there's that work-life balance and dedicating your time. And as a manager, again, when you're working out of CRMs and these systems, I see what you're doing. So I'm constantly saying, hey, what's going on? You're always engaged. You're always talking to your team. If someone goes rogue or silent or offline for a while, it's easy to just be like, hey, what's going on? So either way, pros and cons of both. But again, I think, my personal opinion is companies are probably going to go more remote, and the ability to do it is there. It's just, a decision that the company really wants to go down that route and assume some risk and things of that nature that might come with it from, security and the finances that they might have put into a building for, 10 years. We have 5 floors and we spent $30 million and it's just sitting here. We need to put people in it because we have this real estate. So again, it's just different flavors for different companies.
Yeah, awesome, man. Sterling, let's start to wrap up here. So, if you're talking to someone who's looking to break into a BDR role, what are some criteria they should use when evaluating an organization, evaluating kind of their would-be manager? What are some key areas they should be thinking about?
Yeah, great question. I would say if you're looking to break into sales, that's a key thing there. I want to get into sales. I talk to so many people; they don't know how to get into sales, and the best way to get into sales is join a BDR team. That's how you get the foot in the door. If you have a good organization, and when you interview them or talk to a recruiter, you want to ask questions on what is the career progression of a BDR? There are some companies where if you're a BDR, that's all you're going to be. So you're always interviewing the company that you're talking to. So be very clear and understand, is there a career path? And you will find companies in the more successful ones, they're like, yeah, you come in here and do this, put you in a position for sales. So that's a key thing you want to look at there. When you're preparing for that, do your research of the company. You might just want to get into sales, but think about the product. You want to be passionate about the technology you're getting into, or interested in, or just say, hey, that seems kind of neat, I want to learn more about it. It can be as simple as that, but definitely don't just try to get into a role as a BDR if you're not passionate about the product, because think about it, the emails and the calls that you're going to be doing every day is going to be about that. So that energy level, that interest is going to be really important, because BDR roles they're tough. I mean, it's a grind. It's a very repetitive job. You're constantly learning. You're constantly, leveraging different tools, and you're just drinking from the fire hose constantly. So you really want to consider what type of product or type of ecosystem you want to go into, and learn and grow from. So those are some areas there. When you're looking at the interview process, be prepared. Again, know your company. There's a lot of times where people don't do their homework. They just kind of show up and they're just like, okay, you tell me what you do. So do your homework. That's going to be very critical. And sometimes people are going to throw curveballs at you and try to make you do exercises like sell me this pen. I don't do that, but just be prepared always, and definitely show an eagerness that you're manageable, you're coachable, you want to learn, and you're hungry. Like that's the key thing there, is just show your energy that you really want it. And I would say just a quick tip is, at the end of it, ask for the business. It's something that's just a simple sales thing that you just want to see when you're interviewing someone. So always try to close. Just, hey, after this conversation, how do you feel about me joining the team? I would love to join. So what are next steps? And, there you're like, oh, okay, well, they can at least close me a little bit here. I could see them be a BDR. So I think those are a couple of tips and tricks, and what you want to do when you're looking to get into sales, and when you're looking at a BDR or SDR type role.
Yeah, love that. Always ask for the close. Always try to close it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool, man. Awesome, Sterling. Well, this has been so fun. I've learned a ton here. I know you have much more we could talk about, so we might have to do a part 2 of kind of your journey and what else we need to think about when building a BDR function.
Absolutely. It's a fun world. It's one of those hidden things that a lot of companies don't talk about, but it's a big part of the business. And that's why I've been doing this for over 10 years. It's always changing, and really exciting to work with lots of faces that, constantly change. And you're really, evolving the business behind the scenes in regards to, what marketing and sales is trying to, produce at the end of the day. So awesome. Appreciate your time, Nick. It's been great talking about BDR, SDR teams. And yeah, if you want to go deeper into the life of a BDR, or how companies build these programs, whether you're a startup or a more established company, more than happy to chime in.
Awesome. And Sterling, where can people find you if they want to reach out?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Sterling Rusell. I don't have a podcast like you, Nick. So maybe one day.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure people will reach out. And for those who made it this far in the podcast, thank you. If you have questions for Sterling, hit him up on LinkedIn, leave a comment, give a like, give a subscribe, all that fun stuff. Makes us feel good inside. Sterling, again, thanks so much, man. And we'll plan for a follow-up.
Sounds great, Nick. You have a good one. And again, everybody, hit subscribe, the like button, only helps the YouTube algorithm.
There he is. Awesome. Thanks, Sterling.
Thanks. See you, Nick.